and thank you for being here. My name is Tennille Weatherall, and I'm the superintendent at South Coast Education Service District. ESDs, there's 19 of us across the state of Oregon, and our job is to make sure that there's equitable access to resources for our school districts and our community. And that includes students, families, teachers, and the district in its entirety, as well as the community in terms of the resources we can provide to them. Primarily, we're tasked with 4 core areas of service. That includes special education, technology, school improvement, and business administration services. Each of our ESDs do very different work and very similar work. Essentially, our role is to be flexible and responsible to each and every district and community effort. Our community in Coos Bay is full of dedicated and skillful leaders whom are passionate about seeing our region increase opportunities for its citizens. As I walk around and participate in meetings, each community member from all walks of life come together with a singular focus of reducing barriers and increasing opportunities for our youth and our citizens as a whole. I'm happy to be a part of the conference where we can come together as a group of people to share our ideas and learn about ways to enhance our efforts. If we do it alone, we don't get very far, but if we do it together, we can really make some gains. I also have a special task today to introduce Senator Arnie Roeblen. It's funny, I always mess up your introduction because I just call him Arnie, and I bet a lot of you do as well. And it's because he so quickly becomes a colleague and friend, and he invests so deeply in all the people that he becomes associated with. Arnie's bio is in your packet, but most of you know that he serves the Oregon coast from Coos Bay to the ocean side and parts of Polk and Yamhill counties. He also served as the co-chair of the Joint Committee on Student Success, which is where we focus a large part of our panel presentation today. We have wonderful folks on our panel to help talk about how we can bring together all parts of the educational system to ensure that we're reducing barriers and increase access to all students, but especially our underserved populations. The Student Success Act is an amazing opportunity for all Oregonians. We on the South Coast are gearing up right now to maximize this potential of this amazing opportunity, and that takes a lot of effort, and it takes all of you working together with us to make that happen. Overall, I want to share that Senator Roeblen leads both from the head and the heart. He's fully invested in himself, in his work, and the community he serves. For that, I am deeply grateful. With that, I give you Senator Arnie Roeblen, or Arnie.
Thank you, Tennille, and I know Tennille does a great job. As the South Coast ESD superintendent, she's also the Brookings superintendent. I think she may have 3 or 4 other superintendents. When they don't have anybody, they just bring her down. So she's leaving here to go to Brookings to hire a new superintendent, so she will lose one of her jobs here shortly. So we're pretty excited to have Tennille here. And she was a great student. I was working at U of O, helping her get her superintendent's certificate. So it's really always a privilege to come back home and spend time with really great people. So thank you, Tennille. So today is really an exciting day for me. Education has been my life since I came to Oregon back in the early 1970s as a math teacher in Marshfield High School in Coos Bay, and worked there for 32 years before I got into the legislature. And one of the major reasons I went into the legislature is that I figured we needed to figure out how to fund at least K-12 education. We had not done well. We had different groups look at what we should be funding, and we were always underfunded by a considerable amount of money in K-12. The reality is the entire system, in my opinion, is underfunded. We didn't do anything for early childhood for most of those years. We had a university and a community college system that if you ask them and you look at the debt that students are taking out was underfunded. But we were really good at one thing at the legislature, Oregon Education Benefits Board, and we tried to work with OEIB to get a system in education. We changed that to the governor's office, and we rearranged it one more time, and then that had a timeline on it, so it's gone. So we did do one thing with respect to finding resources from the state level. That will mean that maybe for the first time since we had the quality education model, we will be able to say, we are actually spending the amount of money that it says you need to spend to get the outcomes we've all wanted in our state, which is all kids getting the education they need to go on and make the next steps in their lives. That doesn't mean the job is done. And what you have here is a group of people who are in the midst of starting to make those changes. And so what we have done is we have questions for each one of them. We're going to go through it. They can say a few words about themselves as we do it, but we're going to ask them questions because we have a lot of people here. And our hope with the Coastal Caucus is that people, as they listen to these people, will get to know who they are. And if there's a part of the education system that you are really interested in, there is someone here who can direct you to the right people to answer those questions. And that's what we're about. There is at least one other legislator here with me who has been in all these conversations, but she also has a long history with education in particular. So with that, we're going to start. My hardest question for the new chair, he was new last time, of the Senate Education Committee, and that's Senator Rob Wagner. He's from Tualatin. So the question I have is, what effect has eliminating OEIB, the Chief Education Office, had on the Oregon education system, and what role does education governance play in the realization of a seamless education system? You hear that a lot. We like that term. We want a kid that enters in as an elementary student to make it all the way through community college or university or technical school and come out the other end of that education system having not had to have barriers at anywhere along the line. So we keep calling that a seamless education system. So Rob, your insights.
There we go. We good now? Can you hear me? Okay. So just in brief context, because I know we're heading into our 4th hour of the policy panel death march here. If folks need to get up, move around, hopefully at the end of this we'll be able to really engage in thoughtful conversation. One thing I was talking to President Schott about was it would be great for folks to think about at the end of this panel to maybe find somebody you don't know in the room and talk about what action you can take to support public education in our state. So probably not enough time in the middle of it, but I would definitely encourage you. And then briefly, just by way of introduction, I represent Senate District 19, which is one of those suburban and urban areas. So Lake Oswego, West Lynn, Tualatin, Southwest Portland. So I feel like I'm so pleased to have an opportunity to come to the Coastal Caucus. And the little horns growing up out of the back of my head aren't showing through my hair. But I think that education is one of those places where the urban-rural divide breaks down. When you look at the eyes of a child, when you talk to somebody who's trying to get an education, we can all find consistency through how are we doing that and how do we work together to make that happen. For me, this question also goes back to my values and priorities. I'm raising 4 teenagers, so this actually is a nice little respite from having the hormones that come with trying to tell my teenagers they need to get up before noon because they start back to school next week. And education and this work has really been my life's passion, and it was installed in me in a really early age. My great-grandparents actually met at the turn of the last century as public school teachers. Fell in love. My great-grandfather was a high school teacher. My great-grandmother was a kindergarten teacher. And he was teaching high school back, I know Ben's heard this, back when 20% of teenagers went to secondary education. 20%. 1 in 5 actually were getting a high school level education. So if you think about 1 century, how far we've come and yet how far we have to go, and I think this goes right into the conversation about where we're headed with post-secondary. In addition to my work, I'm chairing the State Senate Education Committee. I serve as the volunteer chair of the Lake Oswego School Board. So clearly I was not loved as a child because how many people here have done school board service? Anyone? Actually, quite a few hands. You know that the pay is great, and then everybody comes before the board with such appreciation for the work that you do. But as policymakers, I think we often talk to things like systems and agencies and districts, but we lose track of one word, and that is students. And what we've seen through the acronym soup of efforts like the Oregon Education Investment Board was an attempt, and I think it was a great attempt, to try to find a seamless system of pre-K through post-secondary education, and to find those linkages that would tie funding and accountability. And being in the legislature when this was getting rolled out, it was a fantastic effort. I think where we got lost was in the Great Recession. The funding piece disappeared quickly. And so what we were left with was an accountability framework, which for a lot of folks at the local level was quite confusing. And as well, I think that there was an underlying initiative fatigue. So the federal government, we saw race to the top, so plan, no child left behind. All of the acronyms start flowing into our education systems, and we had yet another spreadsheet, yet another thing that we had to do at the local level. So what was interesting was the response to no money in the state was giving post-secondary educational institutions additional flexibility or more autonomy to be able to have local boards. And I see two other college or university presidents here. Dr. Naganathan is here. I see Dr. Fuller is, Dr. Insko is here as well. So it's fantastic to have representation from our trues here. But providing additional flexibility at the nation, but I think it also led to some confusion for our students and for policymakers as it relates to where are we within the nature of competition and how does that tie into student success. So my hope is that now, primarily because of the cost, but also because of confusion and how systems are working together. So in the immediate front, heading into this short legislative session, I look forward to working with partners on dual credit and accelerated learning, trying to find clear pathways for transfer as it relates to credits. But longer term, I think we need everyone, and this gets back to the exercise of closing the circle that I hope people can take, and that is how from the ground up, not from the top down, having the state tell you what we need to do, but how from the ground up can we leverage community to be able to build support for post-secondary education, making that tie into K-12 and into career. So I think there's great opportunity, but I do think that it's going to require a lot of work at the local level to make it happen.
Thank you, Rob. I do want to say that we're going to start from the bottom up next with the next person I'm going to talk to. But one of the issues that continues to be a conversation that goes back to what Rob was saying, there's 197 school districts in our state. Each one has their own elected board. They're all going to have to figure out how to do the right things for the kids. And we all recognize that local people have a real investment in their schools and in the kids that are in those communities. But the goal for the state is that every one of those kids in every one of those different school districts gets what they need to make the choices where they want to go in the future as well. So it's a big deal. When I think of 197 school districts, it always makes me amazed that there's that much coordination that has to happen. But then, over the last couple of years, I found out that there's this new group called Early Childhood Education. And 197 would be nice for them. That would be such a small number of groups to coordinate. When you think of early childhood education, you have to think of all the ASDs that work at doing different kinds of early childhood. There's a number of groups of people who work with special education. There are community groups that work. There are church groups that work. There are school districts that have delved into that early childhood center of education. It is an amazing group of individuals, organizations, and different coordination groups that are trying to do early education. And we have given the job to a young woman named Marian Calderon, who is up here today, who has been impressive in her presentations to the legislature and so on and so on. I want you to have an understanding of who she is, and she's going to talk about what are the highlights from the legislative session for the Early Learning Division, and how is ELD preparing for implementation, a very big job.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator, for including me. I'd be remiss in not saying how appreciative and honored I am to be on this panel with my colleagues and important legislators who played such an important role in the early learning achievements in this session. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic at all by saying that I think this is probably this was a historic session for young children and families in our state, possibly the most important session ever for early learning. Is there? Yeah. Okay, I think that sounds a little bit better. Thank you. So I want to start by saying nearly 2 years ago, Governor Brown asked me and the Early Learning Council to develop a comprehensive vision for early learning in our state for children prenatally through age 5 and their families. After a very extensive community engagement process statewide, as well as the participation of 5 state agencies and our education cabinet, my colleagues who are represented here on the panel, we produced Raise Up Oregon, which is a vision for early learning in our state and a roadmap for how to get there. And when I think about this session, I would be remiss in first not starting out to say that there were a number of very important policy and legislative wins aligned with that vision for Raise Up Oregon. And the reason that I start there is I think it's important to recognize and contextualize, particularly as we think about equity, that early learning is inclusive of early childhood education and child care. But when we think about what it's going to take to lift young children and families into opportunity, to harness what we know is the incredible importance of the first 2,000 days of a child's life, the years before they enter kindergarten, we've got to think about the comprehensive needs of families. We have to think about the health of parents. We have to think about their support and their role as a child's first and most important teacher. We've got to think about families who may be struggling and who are experiencing conditions that we know will create adverse circumstances for children's development and learning in those really critical early years. Lack of access to proper nutrition, to stable housing. So the vision in Raise Up Oregon was to really think about how do we look at opportunities and opportunity gaps and redistribute opportunities through thinking about the comprehensive needs of families and the contributions of multiple sectors and systems at the state level and at the community level to meet the needs of families that were hurting the most. So when I think about session, first I start with we have paid leave, we'll have a universally accessible home visiting program for all families with newborns in our state. We had an important agreement with the Earned Income Tax Credit, again recognizing the needs of families with infants and sometimes, unfortunately, what the economic stress that the birth of a child can create. So a number of wins on the big vision, I think, in the roadmap. What I want to focus my time on with you here today is to talk specifically about early childhood education and the investments through the Student Success Act. Those are certainly the purview of the Early Learning Division, primarily the agency that I get the opportunity to lead. So in that front, when we think about what the Senator talked about was important investments in increasing access to early childhood education, to preschool, and other kindergarten readiness supports for children in the earliest years of life. When we think about early care and education, I think it's important to recognize and start with understanding a little bit about what the market looks like in our state. So Senator Wagner talked about the high cost of higher education. Families are the largest funder and contributor to early care and education, and they are largely left alone to brave a market for a service, child care or preschool, that costs as much as higher education. And so when I think about the opportunity that we have with the early learning account is to, through strategic public financing, fund more access to quality early care education for the families that are least able to afford this on their own. And without assistance from public investments, their children are likely to go without access to early care and education. So today in our state, before these investments reach communities, we know that your geography, your race, and your income are going to be predictors of whether your child has a quality early care and education. investment, we have nearly $70–80 million before going into expand preschool education opportunities. The account has created a new equity fund, which will be really critically important to be able to reach children and families with culturally responsive services, again, who may not get access to preschool or other quality child care in their communities. There are more investments to strengthen Head Start, and a new, I'm particularly excited about a significant new investment in early Head Start. So that is reaching children before the age of 3, beginning to work with moms prenatally through age 3, and being able to deliver those comprehensive early childhood education supports to infants and toddlers, as well as supports for families. So I'll sort of save for the questions about maybe some of the specifics of the new investments in the early learning account. But I'll say as we shift to implementation, there are a number of levers, I think, and opportunities in this new investment to ensure that we are coordinating better across the education agencies sort of at the state level. So through this investment, I will work really closely with COLT and our colleagues at the Oregon Department of Education, because while there are some important new investments in Head Start or in pre-kindergarten and preschool promise included in the student success early learning account, there are also a number of opportunities for K-12 to use their own local dollars to be able to expand preschool education. So these are not the only funding streams coming into your communities that you will have to work with to really think about coordinating a pre-K through K-12 system and really building that. And new investments in early childhood special education, I think, are another area where we'll be working together. The Success Act Early Learning Account also is making really important, bold new investments in supporting birth-to-5 educators. I look forward to working really closely with Ben and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, because the higher education system will continue to play an even bigger role in supporting birth-to-5 educators and caregivers if we're going to deliver on the promise of quality early childhood education to children and families in our communities. We've also been fortunate to have a lot more tools and resources from this session to be able to look at safety issues and strengthening our child care system in our states, both through new investments at the state level in the early learning division and staff, as well as more resources for providers. And then last but not least, we have more dollars to be able to coordinate and build on the capacity of our early learning hub system to facilitate, while we do this sort of coordination and alignment at the state level and think about what are supportive policies and investments that reach children and families who are priority populations in communities and deliver them quality early childhood education. We need to be able to ensure that that capacity exists locally. As Senator Romer talked about, we have the field and landscape for early childhood education includes home-based providers, culturally specific organizations, churches, K-12 entities, Head Start programs, and so we need that capacity, and we need partners at the community level that and our hubs are really key in being able to do this, that can work to bring some coherence to all of those different providers and partners in the community, and help us understand what is really the vision for a community about how these dollars can best meet the needs of children and families globally. So it's really, truly a historic and really exciting moment for early learning in our state. And so I'm really privileged and honored to be, I think a highlight of my career will be these next couple of years and realizing the opportunities for young children.
Thank you very much. So we did find out now that if you are a parent and you need childcare, it costs almost as much as it does at the other end when they go to college. Expenses in that building are pretty remarkable. So we're going to skip up to the college area where we've all heard a lot of different things going on. And we have a special person who's been working very hard in Southern Oregon to collaborate with lots of different groups, from high schools to other universities to other colleges. And has a vision about making this seamless system work better. And I really appreciate that she has spent some time with us today. So we have Dr. Linda Shaw, President, Southern Oregon University. And how is Southern Oregon moving closer or further away from a seamless education system?
Thank you, and good morning. By way of introduction, there's a couple of things that I want you to know about me personally, because as you know, our personal experiences often drive our public and our professional commitments. So those two things are this. First, neither of my parents graduated from high school. My father got through 9th grade, my mother through 7th grade. I'm a university president. Education transformed my life. Second, I've parented 5 children. They've been everywhere from gifted and talented to special education. One of them was both, interestingly enough. And I've had children who are really motivated, and I've had children who just don't feel like the educational system is serving them at all. And as a parent, that has pained me because I've known that all of those children have ability. So I have a real commitment to helping other young people or people of all ages who I know have ability achieve what they want to achieve in their lives. So those are the 2 personal things that have really driven and focused much of my work in higher education. Now to the question about are we moving closer to or farther from a seamless educational infrastructure? As a good academic, first of all, I want to say, well, what do we mean by a seamless educational infrastructure? And I think that many of us think first about a system where students can move easily and efficiently from one phase of education to another without losing credits or without having to repeat courses. And that is important. That is very important. But I'd like to encourage us to broaden our thinking to also include just thinking about learners of all ages and really think about a seamless educational infrastructure as bringing all of the resources that we commit to learning throughout our state, whether it's in a formal learning institution like a school or a college or a daycare center, or it's a library or a museum, or it's an employer who is training their workers. Think about all of that as part of our learning infrastructure, okay? So I think if we use both of those definitions, we are moving toward greater integration. We're not there yet, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. So I want to talk about why I believe that, how I think that's happening. First of all, it may seem counterintuitive, and I sort of sense this from Senator Wagner and Senator Roblin's comments, but I would argue that greater independence in governance, at least for the public universities, has actually encouraged and enabled us to better fulfill our individual missions. And as we fulfill those missions, whether it is for Eastern, Western, Southern, and OIT as more of a regional mission, or for University of Oregon, OSU, PSU, more of a statewide or a more comprehensive metropolitan mission, we are able to do those missions better. We're sort of saturating our regions with better service. Let me give you an example. At SOU, our board members are also involved in K through 12 education. They're involved in economic development. They're very involved in early childhood education. And they bring that lens and those commitments to our boardroom. So they encourage us, me and my team, to have that lens as well. And I think it was partly that made me then take the step of joining with President Naganathan at Oregon Tech and the presidents of the 2 community colleges in our region to create the Southern Oregon Higher Education Consortium. Our boards are saying to us, let's see how you can collaborate, because we see that happening in the communities. And so we are bringing that to our work and thinking about how to do that better. At Western Oregon, I see Dr. Fuller out there. He and his board have really recognized changing community needs and are pushing and focused on increased service to Latinx students. At Oregon State, they have more of a statewide mission, and they have really worked to strengthen their statewide public service programs, such as the Extension Service. Think about the Extension Service and what it does. It educates countless adults on topics such as food preservation, land stewardship, nutrition. All of that is a form of education and is part of our infrastructure. Now we need to think about how we leverage that and better align it to create more synergy across all of our systems. So that focus on independent governance has really enabled us to fulfill our missions more deeply, and then is encouraging us to collaborate on the edges of those missions as they move out to overlap. I could draw this for you. I'd see a bunch of circles that are beginning to overlap on each other, and that's the area. Those are the liminal spaces where we're beginning to collaborate. Second, I think the legislature's focus on K through 12 or pre-K through 12 education and the resulting Student Success Act has really brought needed attention and resources to the pre-K through 12 sector. And we in higher education appreciate that. We already work closely with our schools. Each of us do it in our own ways, but we know that they provide many of our students. And we provide many of their teachers and administrators. So it is a symbiotic relationship already. We look forward to seeing how we can work with schools as they live into the Student Success Act to do an even better job of preparing their high school graduates for post-secondary education and employment, and better serving those students if they choose to come to us. And we know not all of them will, nor not all of them should. But for the ones for whom a university education is the most appropriate, then we definitely want to make sure we're serving them as well as we possibly can. And part of that is removing any barriers that continue to exist and making sure that credits that are earned in high school are earned in community college transfer. You know, we hear a lot about this barrier. So I know SOU and Eastern Oregon University, and I'm sure others have done this as well, we've taken a hard look to see how many credits do we allow in. And we allow 80 to 85% of the credits that students bring to us, we accept. The ones we don't are ones that we are either prohibited by an accreditor because of the kinds of requirements that are around accredited programs, are just credits that a student took and they changed their mind. They moved to a totally different area, and it really would not be appropriate to their future employers for us to accept those kinds of credits. So, what else needs to happen to better enable this seamless educational infrastructure? I think first we need an additional focus on adult learners. We've taken a huge step towards strengthening our support of our youngest learners. Now we need to figure out how to enable all of our citizens to adapt to rapid change, because we all know that's what's confronting us. Faster and faster change, both in our society and the fabric of our culture, but also in our economy and in the types of employers we have. Online education is an important piece of this, and many of us are building out online programs. Now, on the face of that, you might think, oh, is that going to be unnecessary duplication and overlap? But the research shows that most adult learners enroll in online programs within 100 miles of where they live, and they enroll in online programs of different sorts, suited for different types of learners, and at different price points. So it's important that we offer a variety of those kinds of programs. Second, I think we really need to take the kind of focus that we just had on pre-K through 12 and bring that to post-secondary education. We do not want to see the state's investment in pre-K through 12 essentially stranded because the community colleges and the universities are not supported now in the ways that will enable us to serve those increasingly diverse learners that are coming towards us. So let's all work together to think about how to make sure that post-secondary system is aligned and properly funded and supported and strong to meet those more successful learners that will be coming our way. And finally, I was really pleased to hear Senator Wagner talk about communities and community engagement around these issues, because I think regional leadership on these issues is really important. One size doesn't fit all. It didn't in pantyhose, and it doesn't in education. So Southern Oregon University, as an example, will be hosting a conference in October where it's called Seamless and Future Ready Education in Southern Oregon. And we're going to be talking about how to align all of our resources to create what we're tentatively calling a signature learning ecosystem that works together so well that families and employers they're drawn to our region because of the strength of how we're leveraging all of our learning resources. We look forward to some of you attending that, and certainly to reporting out on what we learn through working together.
Thank you very much. I do want to point out similar things from all of the panels. If you haven't figured it out yet, most of these people are pretty invested in the things that they care about. And their passion comes through not only in what they say here, but in each of the organizations that they represent. So again, reiterate, this is an opportunity for you to get to know some of these people. Recognize that all of them that have been on the stage today and will be tomorrow are really approachable people, and if you have questions, they're more than willing to answer those questions and help you. So in the PAD program, you've got ways to get a hold of people. We hope and encourage you to do that. Next, we did have Representative Christine Drazen. She made sure that she got a hold of us today to say she couldn't be here, and I just want to say she was an amazing representative. She was on our committee, joint committee on Ways and Means Education, and I found her to be one of those people who had exceptional questions, and I was looking forward to seeing her today and having her here. I feel bad that she's not here for you to get to know. So we're going to go by that one and go to Colt Gill. Colt is the Oregon Department of Education director. He is also someone that my family has known for a long time. My wife and he went to school together. When I was told that he was being considered for this, my wife was more excited, and she said, "You need to understand, Colt Gill is a really quality person. I mean, this is somebody who's pretty exceptional. He also was superintendent before, and he'll talk a little bit about that, I think, as well. But what are the highlights from the legislative session for K-12, and how is ODE preparing to implement the Student Success Act?" I know you haven't thought about that much, because we talk once a week about it, so thank you.
We do. Thank you, Senator Rowland. We do talk once a week about it. It is day 52 of the Student Success Act. I keep a daily count for our staff as we're getting ready to roll different parts of it out. I typically just run right by the introduction part, but I think I do want to take a minute because of actually what Dr. Schott said and how sometimes your experiences that have led you to these positions do impact the way that you go about the work. And I just really appreciated that approach. I was born in Oregon, went to Oregon schools. We didn't have early learning then. We didn't even have kindergarten then. So I went from 1st through 12th grade, went to community college, went to university in Oregon, which makes me a little bit insular to Oregon, but that's my experience. And that's one of the things that makes me feel very humble and honored to be holding this position to provide service back to a system that did me very well. I was also a special education student and received those services. And so the opportunity to give back to this system is really important to me personally. I also started teaching in Oregon in 1989. And in the fall of 1990, Oregon voters passed ballot measure 5. And so it's been 3 decades since that ballot measure passed. And each of those legislative sessions after that, the legislature has come forward and tried to think about, now funding schools is the state's responsibility, how do we take that on? And the legislature this last couple of sessions really, because there was an interim where this Joint Committee on Student Success toured the state of Oregon, visited communities and schools across the state. At every one of those stops, I got to follow them as a groupie of that committee on many of their stops. And at every stop, they started early. They usually talk to community and business leaders first thing in the morning, like 7 or 7:30 in the morning. And then they talked to who they really wanted to talk to first every time, which was students. So they started every day at a school at 9 o'clock, and they spent at least 2 hours with students, middle school and high school students, hearing about what they thought Oregon schools needed. And then they would tour schools and systems and hear about things that are working really well in different communities and struggles that different communities are having with their education system. And then they would jump ahead into the afternoon and hear from educators and others, and then into the evening and open it up to the entire community and hear testimony. And I think that idea that they're holding hearings, they really heard. So they listened really carefully, and they designed a bill, the Student Success Act, that really comes through on what they heard across the state of Oregon, and also recognize that the solutions look different in different communities in our state because of the diversity that we have. And so they built in a lot of flexibility for local communities and school districts and early learning hubs to be able to implement differently in different communities to meet the needs there. So I'm going to actually talk just a little bit about the Student Success Act because I think it's such a powerful piece of legislation. At the Department of Ed, we are holding on to 3 principles or values as we drive implementation through our districts and through our communities. And we held on to these 3 values because as we read through the multiple pages of that act, we see these repeated over and over again. So one of them is equity. What the Student Success Act recognizes is that Oregon is doing a pretty good job of holding a high level of rigor for its students, and the 80% of students who are able to meet that level of rigor, the schools are doing a fairly good job for them. The schools are not serving every community well though. So we're failing in many ways for our students of color, our students with disabilities, our emerging bilingual or English language learner students, our tribal communities, and then our students who are navigating poverty, homelessness, or the foster care system. And so the Act tells us to specifically address the needs of these different populations that we have been struggling with for some time in Oregon. It also says that schools can't do this alone, early learning providers can't do this alone, that we need to connect with our communities. So it calls out a requirement for engagement like no other piece of legislation in education that I've seen before. So it will require our school districts this fall and our early learning hubs later on to connect with their communities, specifically to the populations I talked about and the families of the populations I talked about, and hear their ideas and their concerns and recognize the assets that they bring to the systems. The last one is around accountability. So this took a different approach to accountability than the federal systems took, which is very much a top-down approach to accountability. This approach to accountability that the legislators wrote into the Student Success Act is dual. So it's a shared accountability. So it's accountability from the state and it's accountability at the local level. So it builds in accountability at the school board level, so that school boards are both accountable to their community and holding their administrators and their teachers and their staff accountable to the outcomes. And then it's a shared accountability with the state. So if a community is not making a difference in the outcomes for the different students and their needs, then the state is required to come in and provide additional supports to ensure that those students can reach those outcomes. Values around equity, community engagement, and shared accountability. Beyond that, the Student Success Act it's large. So it has 12 entirely new programs for students in Oregon, and it enhances or grows 16 others. It provides all kinds of new services for students in early learning systems and children and families, all the way through 12th grade and preparing students to enter the higher ed system or go out into the workforce. One of the biggest investments in the Student Success Act is the Student Investment Account, which are funds that go directly to communities through school districts, so that those school districts can increase instructional time for students, reduce class size or caseloads, so that students get more individual attention, address student health and safety in a number of different ways, and implement a more well-rounded education, which is much more like the education that I received when I attended schools in Oregon many years ago. The expansion side supports efforts in a number of different areas, including additional nutrition services for students so that more students have access to meals at school, again, school safety efforts, equity efforts, and a number of different supports to ensure that students are really ready to learn when they enter that classroom. Now, I could, and I have, because I've been talking about the Student Success Act for at least 51 days since it's passed, could go on for a long, long time. But you also asked about other pieces of legislation to highlight, and there were 65 other bills that passed that impact education directly. I'm just going to highlight a few that deal with student safety and deal with equity for students. So in safety, the first piece is, again, the Student Success Act. So the Student Success Act implements provisions to reduce suicide, provides suicide prevention and regionalized programs across the state of Oregon, as well as safety assessments for students, and provides for safe and inclusive schools that develop social emotional learning for students. We also had Senate Bill 155, which passed, which provides authority and responsibility to the state to address misconduct by adults in education systems towards students. So we'll have different levels of investigation to make sure that our students stay safe in our systems. We had Senate Bill 415, which was something I actually asked a couple of legislators for. When I came to the Department of Education a little bit, a year and a half ago now, I guess, I was shocked as a 28-year, at that time, educator in Oregon, that when you're a leader or a staff member at the Department of Education, you're not a mandatory reporter for child abuse. All of our teachers are, all of our school staff are. We run a school at the Oregon Department of Education. We run the Oregon School for the Deaf. And we're in schools constantly in a number of different ways, and we weren't mandatory reporters. So the legislature fixed that and required our staff to go through that training and become mandatory reporters. Senate Bill 52, ADDIES Act, this requires school districts to adopt policy around comprehensive suicide prevention. And so we'll be working with districts to implement that through the year. On the equity side, the Student Success Act provides regular funding to different programs to serve particular populations in Oregon. We have an African American Black Student Success Plan in Oregon that is now funded through the Student Success Act. We have an American Indian Alaska Native Plan that is recognized in law for the first time through the Student Success Act and is funded to support our tribal communities. And we will be developing a Latinx Student Success Act and hearing from that community about how we can better serve our Latinx students in Oregon. We also had House Bill 3409, which serves our students in after-school programs, sports programs, extracurricular programs, all those activities, and ensures that their equity and civil rights are respected and maintained in those arenas as they are during the school day. And then finally, we had Senate Bill 664, which Senator Wagner helped to move through, and that requires instruction about the Holocaust and genocide. So we have a lot of new information happening in our schools, and now we have the resources to ensure that this happens and that our students are positively impacted by it.
Thank you. And it really was an amazing session with respect to education. And our hope, I guess the Student Success Committee that I was co-chair of, when he was talking about the different things we did, I will say that all of the members felt that the conversations we had with students was probably the most important part. And we were in Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, Northern urban, rural. One school on the Columbia Gorge was so small that we usually would break into groups and we'd have about 10 kids for 2 of the legislators who were there. There were 14 legislators, so 7 groups. In one school, it was the whole school, because that's the whole school. And I will tell you that the overwhelming thing, and you heard it from what Oda said, that hit us was the anxiety that is in a whole lot of our kids, no matter where they live in that state. They're anxious about life. They're not sure what's happening and where it's going to happen. And there's a lot of stuff about suicide. They brought that up repeatedly. It didn't matter where we were, that friends of theirs had issues, and we needed to start as adults addressing some of that kind of stuff in our schools in ways we haven't before. And having professionals in schools, psychologists, sociologists, and others was an important part of the conversation. And kids would say, yeah, if I needed a problem because I had a friend that was thinking of suicide, I could go to the counselor's office and they could probably get him in 2 weeks. And we didn't think that was going to work very well. So how do we have emergency systems in place? It was a unique experience having lived in the schools and being at Marshall for 32 years. The issues and stresses on kids today are very different. The social media, the other kinds of things create a lot of different things that we need to deal with. So it was an amazing experience, and I think a lot of those bills came out of that conversation that took place. And I appreciate Senator Wagner. We had an elderly person who lived through the Holocaust who came and spoke to us and was instrumental in talking to kids around the state about what was going on. He tragically was killed in a car accident, but it was an amazing voice to hear, and the kids that came to talk about how impactful it was on their lives to hear about this ended up resulting in that. A few years before that, it was the new legislation that we'll eventually be having on understanding the native populations in our state in Senate Bill 13. That's coming along, so we'll keep you informed about some of that stuff as well. So it's been an exciting time in education. With that, thank you, Colt. We're going to move on to one of my special friends in the legislature, who has been on a couple of committees with me. It was on the Joint Committee on Education with regard to Ways and Means, so we got to do. She came to a lot of the meetings around the state. She was always involved, and so it was exciting to know that she was going to come here. So I was going to say to Teresa Alonso-Leon, who's from Woodburn, how can high schools and higher education institutions work together to ensure students have a seamless transition, and how does the GED factor in? She brought a lot of wealth of understanding and knowledge about this to a lot of our committees, so thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Hello, everybody. My name is Teresa Alonso-Leon, and I represent District 22, which is Woodburn through the north part of Salem in the Marion County area. I am the oldest of 5. My family came to this country in the early 80s and became migrant farm workers. So as far as I can remember, I was picking berries, all the berries, any kind of berry. I did that every summer. And I really appreciated our president who shared a little bit about her parents, and I wanted to share that with you too to give you a little bit of context of why I'm so passionate about education. I'm from Mexico, state of Michoacan. My mom went up to 4th grade, and my dad didn't have an opportunity to go to school because as the oldest male in his family, he had to start working at a very young age. And so he didn't have a chance to go to school. So when my parents got married, my mom, with her 4th grade education, taught my dad how to read and write based on her 4th grade education. So as you can imagine, education is very important in our family. In this country, I participated in the public school system. I loved school, mainly because if we had summer school, then I wouldn't have to pick as many berries. I got to go to summer school, but I wasn't lucky all the time, which also meant that, you know, I grew up very humble. We didn't have much, so allowing me to work actually helped my parents because I got to work for my clothes, my school clothes, and my back-to-school supplies. And my first bicycle I got to buy, and I can say that I'm proud of that and that I contributed to our family. But we struggled a lot. My parents didn't understand how to navigate the education system. And so when I had amazing opportunities, they didn't quite understand what they meant for me. So I have a unique perspective in respect to education because not understanding how to navigate our elementary or K-12 system and not understanding how to navigate the university or college system is challenging for many of our families, for many immigrant families or first-generation school families or low-income families. And I realized that not fixing some of those challenges really impacts the success of some of our students. I was one of those kids that because I love school so much, I couldn't wait to go to college. And I couldn't wait to go to college because teachers and educators reminded me and told me on a daily basis how amazing of a student I was and what college am I going to, and that college was going to change my life. And because my parents didn't understand how to navigate the education system or didn't know how to ask those questions that parents often do for their kids, I had to learn that all by myself. And would go home and was just pumped to tell my parents that I was going to go to college someday. And then, my parents would say, that's a great goal, mija, but that's not possible for you because we can't afford it. And, we don't want to set you up for failure. And so that hurt me a lot, knowing that I knew they got the importance of education, but they didn't because they didn't understand how it functioned. They weren't my number one cheerleaders. But I was so lucky and that I had amazing teachers around me who were my cheerleaders and who did encourage me, and so much that I couldn't wait to go to college. So imagine me as a sophomore saying, I want to take as many credits that I can in high school so that I can graduate early so I can go to college. And while my teachers were excited for me and encouraged me, I also burned out. And ended up transferring to another high school to hopefully, help me get re-engaged again. And if it wasn't for this particular counselor who pulled me aside and helped me acknowledge that because of all the responsibilities I had at home, that I had outgrown high school. And that was probably why I, had some of the challenges that I had in school. And I love school, but I went through this weird phase. And that he helped me understand that I had outgrown high school. And he asked me a very important question. He asked me, what is it that you want to accomplish in life? And because I had internalized this idea of going to college, that was the only thing I wanted to do and become a professional. Whatever that profession was, I didn't know, but I wanted to go to college. And he helped me figure out how to do that. And through this process, I discovered that I could earn my GED, and by then I didn't know what that meant. But the federal government had a program called the migrant, or the high school diplomacy program for migrant students. And if I applied to this program, I would essentially get a scholarship at U of O to get my GED, and then I would be able to start my college career. When I found out, I was like, where do I sign up and how can I do this? How can we make this happen? So I applied, and then later that summer I got a letter, technically letters to my parents, but because, I'm the oldest and I read all their mail so I can translate it to them. I was able to read my own letter to my parents. And it said, congratulations to the parents of Teresa Alonso Leon. She's been accepted to our HEP program, high school coaching program at U of O. And I was able to start that fall. So in 3 months, I got my GED and started Lane Community College, way before my peers. And I realized, because I loved education so much, I wanted to become a teacher. So I started off, I transferred to Western to become a teacher. And then I had a brilliant mentor who said, before I sign any letters of recommendation to the education program, I need to know that you really want to become a teacher. So go work in the education system. Go work at an elementary school or a high school. I don't care, but go work. So I did that. That was the best advice of my life. I worked for an elementary school as a teacher assistant, and also a middle school, and also a high school. And you know what I found out? I found out that teachers are amazing, and I do not have that superpower that they do. And therefore, I did not become a teacher. Because they have a special talent that I absolutely don't have. And that is all kinds of level of patience for all kinds of age ranges. And then, because of that, I worked with all age groups, I discovered what age I did really appreciate working with. And then that led to other job opportunities that really helped me, really be able to work with the populations. And so I worked in the K-12 system. I worked for community college and ran a national scholarship program for migrant students. Then I worked for PSU, so the university system, and worked in their diversity, equity, and inclusion office. And then I worked for the state, and I became the state GED administrator. So I came full circle from being a GED student to becoming the state's GED administrator, which to me, I thought I had made it big. Like, this is my career job, and I love this job. And I had this amazing opportunity to restructure the entire system and bring Oregon to becoming one of the top 10 states in the country for highest graduation rates in the country among our GED population. And so, thank you, you can clap. I realized that our state wasn't doing a very good job at addressing the needs of this segment of our population that includes 16 to 60 plus year olds. And I discovered that we needed to do a better job. There's so many circumstances, so many reasons that segments of our population opt to earn their GED. And then I also discovered that a lot of people had this stigma around folks who earn their GED. And then I started telling everybody I earned a GED, and I have a master's degree. And so, and so I started helping people understand the reasons why people chose to earn a GED. And then, I got some buy-in. But it was a lot of work, and it's still a lot of work, to tell you the truth, as a legislator who I think have become a broken record in making sure when we're talking about our education system that we're not forgetting our GED population, because they also should be included, and we should be talking about them in respect to their opportunities post earning their GED, whether they go into apprenticeship programs, career education programs, community college programs, all the way to university programs. So it became kind of the thing that I brought to the table in addition to my comprehensive years of education. One of the things that, as I was processing, how can we create a system, we bring this up again, a seamless transition system within higher ed. I always think about, I'm a big picture leader, and I think about, what can we ultimately achieve? And I love this phrase, cradle to career plus, right? Career plus means, as professionals, we should never stop learning. We should continue learning if we can and improving our skills. but we should be investing in the littlest of our residents of our state, making sure they have a strong start, and making sure that we continue that in the elementary school years, making sure we continue that in the middle school years and into the high school years, but always emphasizing the idea, the concept of post-secondary. And when we think about post-secondary, I think we always think about community college or university. But I'd like us to start thinking about it more globally. Apprenticeship programs, CTE programs, and community college and all the programs they offer, all the way to doctoral programs. Because I think when we think post-secondary and we're inclusive in that respect, more young people feel empowered and they feel courageous and they feel like, okay, the career I've chosen is an important career. A CTE or an apprenticeship program is just as important as somebody who earned a 4-year degree. I think it's important for our young people to hear that. Because you know what? If we don't have our folks who go into our CTE or apprenticeship programs, our infrastructure would break down. We need them. Just like we need lawyers and doctors and educators and legislators. So it's just really important that we communicate that way. You know, we need to remove barriers going into these programs. We talked about the cost. It is expensive for a lot of folks to go into post-secondary. They can't afford it. If you can't afford food, you can't afford childcare, if you can't afford your rent or your mortgage, going on to post-secondary opportunities is kind of last on the list because you're just trying to survive. So we need to remove that barrier, that cost barrier, and make it accessible for folks. We talked a lot about, Clovio talked about segments of our population that we haven't done a good job at serving. Our African American population, our Native American population, our Latinx population, our low income population, our folks with limited abilities. There's all kinds of groups that we still need to do more work on. And that means that both our K-12 system and our higher ed system need to be culturally competent to be able to serve all of our populations. So we need to work on scaling up our current staff in those institutions. It's really important. And I really appreciate some of our institutions who are already doing that. And they're doing an amazing job, and they're great examples and mentors for other institutions who are starting to do that work. So I'm really proud of that. I also think that that our students, we need to really emphasize, and when I talk about students, it really is the family. Because when one student goes to college, the likelihood, even if their parents didn't, like in my case, and in the president's case, the siblings will follow. So I mentioned I'm the oldest of 5. Well, all of my brothers and sisters had no choice but to go to college because I said that's what they were gonna do. And they did. So every single one of my siblings are college educated. They all have 1 or 2 degrees. And that's because, we talk about when we go to college, not if we go to college, or post-secondary opportunities. It's when we go to post-secondary opportunities, not if. So having that family mindset really creates this environment of college going. My parents had a hard time when I left. And so we need to think about, how can we best support families when children do go off to college? How is the family dynamics going to change? And that's in the K-12 system. That's part of the cultural competency that we need to try to help make sure families understand and get the support systems. But you know what? It's equally important in the university side. When I worked for PCC and was running my national scholarship program, I had some challenges from parents who were telling me, yeah, my child can participate in your after school or after class activity. And I was like, these are college students. My students are telling me, their parents are telling them that they can't participate in night classes or after school or after 5 or 6. And so I thought, this is interesting. This is a, cultural dynamic that I didn't anticipate happening, but I totally get it. So I ended up creating a program specifically for the parents. So a bridge program for the parents, kind of. I had the parents of all of my students in my program come to the community college and participate as college students for a day. And they did everything from a college career fair to attending mini half-hour courses that instructors volunteer to teach, to having a full graduation for them. Once they internalize the level of work students experience, that the whole engagement completely turned around. My students participated. We went from like a 70, 78 attendance rate among our students to 80, I think it was about 88 to 98% attendance rate. Because now as the parents and the community college system working together to make sure those kids were moving on, that they were persevering in the class and in my program. So it's really about engaging the entire family. Because then if one goes to college, the likelihood of other young people in that family are gonna go. So the other thing I wanna quickly mention is, let's see. I think that our community colleges, our universities, and our K-12 systems need to do a better job at helping our families understand the whole credit system and the credits that young people take in the high schools. And I think some middle schools are starting to offer college credit also. There is a limit of how many college credits a young person can come with at a university or community college before the financial aid goes away. And we need to do a better job at communicating that and sharing that with families, because if parents are encouraging their kids to take as many college courses as possible, when they get to the community college or university, they no longer are eligible for certain financial aid programs. So these are the things that are that we need to communicate better and do a better job as far as our institutions and high schools. There's all kinds of work we still need to do, but I'm really proud of the Student Success Act. They put so much more funding into our K-12 system, which means that more students are gonna transfer into post-secondary, and we just need to make sure that our post-secondary institutions are prepared to meet the needs of all of our students coming in. So I'm super excited to be part of this conversation, because I think the next step is doing something similar for the university systems that we did with our K-12 system, like our Student Success, so that we can also make sure that we're funding it appropriately, so we can remove those barriers that our students have in attending post-secondary. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, there's a plethora of passion in this group. So with that, one of my other passionate people, we have two people left, so we'll make sure that we have enough time for Ben as well. But Serena Sotomayor Wesley is the director of the Youth Development Division. It's, what role does re-engagement play in a seamless system of education?
I know it's good afternoon about right now, so I'm just going to be really quick. Again, my name is Serena Sotomayor Wesley, and I am the director of the Youth Development Division. And one thing I've noticed this morning thus far is nobody has mentioned the word youth. I keep hearing students, I hear early learners, I hear adult learners, and I hear kids. The Youth Development Division supports community-based efforts to support youth through the critical transitions. So we do not yet have a seamless system, because it's the youth that are slipping through the cracks in that system, or I should say slipping through the threads, because the threads are not, they're not tied tight together. And so we don't have a lot of things. So we're sending our youth here to there. So what we do is we fund organizations, we fund workforce centers to help youth get back to the system. We keep talking about a diploma or a GED, but we want to make sure that youth have options, and those are very different options. They keep talking about the difference between a diploma and a GED, and as one of my staff said, what we should be focusing on, that they have something, that they're geared towards something. We want to make sure that our youth have a system to go back to. So through the Student Success Act, we were given a little bit of money, and we're going to do great things with that little bit of money. And that is to create a youth development system for our state. And we're doing some mapping right now to figure out where we're going to start. And right now, where I see that we're starting is down in this direction, down in the Coos Bay area. They're looking at, what am I not getting? There's a lot of things that they're not getting. They're not considered students once they are pushed out, dropped out, or pulled out of school. And as Senator Leon said, and as our president said, and a couple others here on the panel has said, students leave school for a reason. Sometimes school systems have not changed. They've been the same since I was in school, and that was over 40 or 50 some years ago. Not really telling my age, but I'm up there. And how do we make sure that there's something there for them? How do we create a system, not sending them back to the same system, but creating something that's different, something that's innovative, like how about opening at 12 and closing at 8? So those who have to go to work to help their families, they can still take classes in the evening for those who don't have computer systems so they can learn at home, because in some of our rural areas, some of the Comcast systems, some of the internet systems are just not fully there, and sometimes they're going on and off, on and off. But how do we provide that support? So what we do at the YDD is we provide grants currently in gang prevention, workforce, community innovation, to help organizations. And we've helped quite a few organizations that are going to support youth to do that. We have youth that are going through, youth that are in re-entry, because maybe they were in OIA, but once they come out, they need to re-enter society so they can become thriving adults. We have youth that are part of the foster care system that have just been, once they've aged out, where do they have to go? So without the community-based organizations or others like mentoring, coaching these youth to get them back to where they need to be, they're just going to be out there, and we don't want that. So when it comes to how do we feel like we fit in a seamless system, we first have to create a seamless system so that we can fit. And we need the system to fit our youth, not our youth fitting into the system, because our youth today do not look like our youth of yesteryear. Our youth are totally different. We have social media that's helping them. They're on social media, they're getting in. So what does that look like in our families? Our families are different. So when we're talking about youth, we're also talking about family engagement. And what does that look like? How do we make sure that our families are understanding, yes, my youth isn't in school, but my youth is still getting some of the things that they need. By them not being in school, they're not considered a student, so they don't get all those different resources. But they can get them through the community-based organizations, through their workforce systems, or whatever is set up in those different communities. And we know in doing this work in youth development that there's a lot of transportation needs also out in these areas. So how do we help combat that? How do we make sure that they're going to get where they need, get to where they need, without having barriers put up in their way? How do we make sure those barriers are broken down? And what we're going to do through this new re-engagement system that Senator Roblin here and others have so kindly and so passionately helped to establish, or helping us to establish, or getting there, to make sure that those barriers are broken down so that our youth don't have the same problems that they continue to have. So again, what does that look like? It looks like organizations coming together, collaborating. That's behavioral health, that's early learning, that's K-12, that's the higher ed, that's workforce, that's a lot of different entities that's food banks, that's housing, because we have a lot of students that are going through houselessness. So how do we make sure that there's there's resources there for them to access to get to what they need? Then I'll just add one more thing, then I'll pass the mic. Okay. No matter what we're doing, we also should think about our youth. They should not be forgotten. In this conversation, as we continue for the next day and beyond, we should remember our youth. They should be part of the student. They should be part of the early learning conversation. They should be part of the housing conversation. They should be part of the behavioral health conversation as we're moving forward. So I asked you going forward, each and every one of you in this room, will have some type of contact with the youth. And I ask you to remember that when you're coming into contact with the youth. What can I do? What can my organization do? What can my agency do? What can my business do? What can my small business do to help you get beyond those hurdles as we're moving forward in our education system? Thank you.
Thank you. And stay tuned for our youth development and see how we do. We have a lot of kids who we are losing their potential right now. We need to make sure that they're re-engaged in part of our system. We can't afford not to use their talents. So with that, we're going to end up with Ben Cannon. He's the Executive Director of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. How are we aligning the work of K-12 with community college, universities, and career opportunities? Ben has been basically in charge since the beginning. So Ben, thank you. He was a legislator with me. I appreciated his wisdom and knowledge. So Ben.
So I appreciate that I'm the only thing that stands between or sits between you and lunch. So 4 sentences, Senator. 4 sentences. See if you can hold me to it. Okay. First, and I won't be able to answer the question in 4 sentences, but I will provide a few concluding thoughts. First, I greatly appreciate the recognition of many of the panelists on stage with me today that to fully realize the promise of the Student Success Act will require a new level of commitment to an investment in post-secondary opportunities for Oregonians. I really appreciate that, and it makes me very hopeful moving forward. To get there, for post-secondary education, which I help to lead, will require a shared vision and strategies for an affordable, accessible, equitable, and yes, seamless system of post-secondary education. Developing that vision cannot be done in isolation. It is not the job of the HEC alone, organization I lead, our institutions, or even our local communities, but all of us together working with students and faculty and staff and legislators in the development of those visions and strategies. It's an extraordinary opportunity, an extraordinary obligation. We've got a great team, we've got a great legislature. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Ben. So, as you can tell, there's a lot of passion in education. There's a lot of opportunity to come forward. We need all of your help to keep us on track and make that work. It means that we're going to have to figure out how to find a lot more teachers and a lot of people to put in classrooms. There's a lot of hiring that's going to go on up here to fill the positions to make that work. So it's going to take all of us, and you're going to need to continue to be critical of the things we do and ask the questions that need to be asked so that we can continue to make our education system work for all of our kids. With